Carson Hocevar left Michigan with a top-5 finish. Normally, that's the kind of result that gets drivers praised all week. Instead, one of the biggest stories coming out of Michigan had nothing to do with where Carson Hocevar finished. It had everything to do with what happened after the race. Because while most drivers were heading toward their haulers and wrapping up their day, Bubba Wallace had something he wanted to say directly to Carson Hocevar. And judging by the reaction across the NASCAR garage, Bubba Wallace wasn't talking about a single incident. He was talking about a problem that some drivers believe has been building for months. A problem that could eventually become bigger than any mistake Carson Hocevar has made on the racetrack this season. So, what exactly happened at Michigan? What did Bubba Wallace tell Carson Hocevar after the race? And why are so many people suddenly discussing Carson Hocevar's reputation instead of his performance? We're breaking down the entire story, so make sure you watch until the very end of the video. Before we get started, hit subscribe to NASCAR Nation News and turn on notifications so you don't miss any latest NASCAR updates. To understand why Bubba Wallace felt the need to say something, you have to start with what happened during the race itself. The biggest flashpoint came during a restart in Stage 2. Restarts at Michigan are always difficult because drivers know they have a limited number of opportunities to gain track position. Everybody is trying to maximize momentum before the field spreads out. That creates situations where small mistakes can quickly become major incidents. On this restart, Carson Hocevar got involved in a sequence that turned into one of the biggest crashes of the afternoon. Multiple cars were collected, several teams had their race plans ruined, and frustration immediately started building across the garage. The incident once again placed Carson Hocevar at the center of attention, which is important because this wasn't the first time his name had been connected to post-race discussions this season. What happened afterward is what elevated the story. Television cameras and reporters noticed Bubba Wallace and Carson Hocevar talking after the race. From a distance, it didn't look like an argument. There was no dramatic confrontation. There was no shouting match. Instead, it appeared to be one driver trying to explain something to another driver. When Bubba Wallace later discussed the exchange, his message was fairly direct. He said Carson Hocevar has tremendous speed, but he also suggested that the young driver is creating enemies because of the way some of these incidents continue to happen. Bubba Wallace's point wasn't that Carson Hocevar lacks ability. His point was that talent alone doesn't solve every problem in the Cup Series. Drivers also have to earn trust from the people racing around them every week. That trust matters more than many fans realize. A NASCAR race isn't just a collection of individual battles. Drivers spend months racing the same competitors. They learn who can be trusted in tight situations and who tends to force aggressive moves. Over time, those opinions become part of a driver's reputation. This is where Carson Hocevar's situation becomes complicated. On one hand, his aggression is part of what makes him successful. Drivers who reach the Cup Series usually aren't conservative racers. They get there because they're willing to attack opportunities and take chances. If Carson Hocevar suddenly stopped racing aggressively, he probably wouldn't be the same driver. On the other hand, there is a difference between aggression and overdriving a situation. That's the balance experienced drivers spend years trying to master. Bubba Wallace's comments suggest he believes Carson Hocevar is still learning where that line exists. The timing of those comments is important because Carson Hocevar's season has featured both impressive performances and controversial moments. He already has a Cup Series victory this year and has repeatedly shown he can compete against established veterans. At the same time, several incidents have created frustration among fellow competitors, leading to more scrutiny whenever something happens around the number 77 car. One reason Bubba Wallace's remarks received so much attention is because they didn't sound emotional. They sounded calculated. If a driver is angry immediately after a wreck, people usually dismiss it as frustration. Racing is emotional. Tempers flare. Drivers cool down and move on. Bubba Wallace's comments felt different because he wasn't focused exclusively on Michigan. He was talking about a larger pattern. He was talking about what happens when multiple drivers begin forming the same opinion about someone's driving style. That doesn't mean everyone agrees with Bubba Wallace. Some fans love Carson Hocevar's approach. They believe NASCAR needs more drivers willing to take risks and challenge veterans. From that perspective, criticism often comes with the territory. Aggressive racers have always divided opinion. Some become fan favorites because they're willing to race differently than everyone else. Others believe Bubba Wallace's warning is valid because the Cup Series becomes much harder when competitors stop giving you room. A driver can have all the speed in the world, but if relationships inside the garage continue deteriorating, every race becomes more complicated. What's clear is that Carson Hocevar now finds himself at an important point in his development. The question is whether he can keep those strengths while reducing the mistakes that continue creating headlines. To Carson Hocevar's credit, he didn't run away from the conversation. He acknowledged the discussion and appeared willing to listen. That matters because young drivers often face a choice when criticism starts arriving. Some ignore it completely. Others use it as information and adjust where necessary. The best drivers usually find a middle ground. They keep the qualities that made them successful while refining the areas that create problems. That may be exactly what Carson Hocevar needs to do moving forward. As for Michigan itself, the race winner was Denny Hamlin, who capitalized on a strong performance to take another significant victory. Yet despite Hamlin's win, much of the post-race attention shifted toward Bubba Wallace and Carson Hocevar because their conversation touched on a question that could influence the rest of the season. What made Hamlin's win stand out even more was the way he managed the race, when things were constantly breaking apart around him. While other drivers got caught in incidents or lost track position during key restarts, Hamlin stayed patient and avoided unnecessary risks. In a race where survival mattered just as much as speed, that calm execution ended up being the difference. And it's exactly why he was able to capitalize when the opportunity finally opened up in the closing stages. Can Carson Hocevar continue racing with the same aggression that made him successful while avoiding the mistakes that are frustrating more and more drivers? That question wasn't answered at Michigan, but it may become one of the biggest stories to watch over the next several races.